Hello and welcome to this live book club of the Lotus Eaters. I'm joined by Carl,
Hello.
and we're going through Rousseau's The Social Contract, which leads on from Discourses on Inequality, which we did previously.
Yes, it does.
So, my understanding is Discourses on Inequality, he's like, where should humanity really be? And it's this autistic nonsense.
Well, it was his answer to the question of what was man like in the state of nature.
But therefore, what freedom should we have? Because we had those freedoms in the past, kind of thing. Even though it was all mad.
Yeah.
Established that. So this is him laying out how we're going to get there, presumably.
How are we going to get there? By living in a society. See, except we're not just going to go abandon society. Yeah. Yes, very much. He accepts that we're not just going to abandon civilization and retreat back to the woods, right?
Return to monkey, not on the table?
No, so he accepts that's not going to happen. But he's like, look, what we can do, though, is use our big brains to figure out how we can be savages living in a society. It's like, why would we want that? Why is that good? But he doesn't answer that. He just goes on. Right. So basically, he established in Discourse that man in a state of nature is his optimistic view of it is that we're ultimately free and ultimately equal. And so that's what we're trying to achieve in a society. And so if we're going to abolish this inequality and slavery that we're under, we must adopt this social contract that will restore us to this primeval state. And only Rousseau is clever enough to work this out, though he doesn't really work it out. See. And so he presents his positive view of what the civil society should look like in order to be, quote, acceptable according to reason. Oh, God. Has to be acceptable according to Rousseau's evaluation of what reason is. Brilliant. And so this is so we can become savages living in society, as said, right? So before we go on, though, the consequences of this is such a radical text that it was banned in his native home of Geneva. The copies of it were collected up and burned, and he had to flee to England. Right. So this is like, it's so funny because the preface is so genuflecting. Oh, towards the hallowed city fathers of Geneva, whom I have so much respect. How about you read this? And they're like, no, get out. We're going to execute you as a heretic for proposing all of this nonsense. Right. But the thing is, it was compelling because Rousseau, despite his many, many flaws, as both a man and a thinker, he has an amazingly compelling writing style. It's very persuasive. It is very pleasurable to read. So anyway, the purpose of the book is to solve the... I love the skeptical look here, Callum. The purpose of the book is...
The man is he's so full of BS.
Yes.
Yet his writing's that good.
Yeah,
He gets away with it.
He's like an intellectual confidence trickster. Like he's someone who's very, very smooth at what he does. But when you actually spend any amount of time thinking about what he said or proposed, you're like, wait, this is lunacy? No wonder they were like, no, you're going to be put to death if you don't flee. Which, would have been better for mankind, probably. Anyway, so the purpose of the book is to solve the following problem. It says, to quote, find a form of association which may defend and protect with the whole force of the community, the person and property of every associate, and by means of which each coalescing with all may nevertheless obey only himself and remain as free as before. What a task.
So you would only obey yourself.
Yes.
How?
The whole force of the community will allow you to only obey yourself. What a mad task that is, right? Especially when we get into his concept of the general will, which you have to obey at all times and all places, or else you're essentially a traitor. So it's like, well, how am I free in any way, shape, or form? But we'll get to it, right?
It reminds me of that Futurama sketch. I choose to believe what I was programmed to believe.
Yes.
It's like, well, the community thinks that X is true, so you must go along with it to be free.
No, that is, I'm not even understating it. That's exactly, almost word for word, how Rousseau describes it, right? I'm not even joking. I was looking forward to doing this with Callum. I knew that it'd just be like, this is just nonsense. Why does anyone... Yeah, well, they do. The left is following this plan, right? So in book one, it's 4 books. And in book one, it's chapters 1 to 5. He's basically laying the groundwork. He's going over what he's been through in Discourse on Inequality. But it begins...
Well, that was gold.
Yeah, exactly. That was comedy gold, at least. But it begins with the most quotable and most famous line. And every good work begins with a famous line, right? And do you know what this one is?
Nope.
I'm surprised. This is one of those things. Man is born free and everywhere is in chains. Men aren't born free. They're born as babies. And if you've ever seen a baby, if you can describe any amount of freedom to a baby, you're an idiot. Babies are not free. They're totally dependent on their parents in every way for everything. So he begins with a premise that's just nonsense. And of course, not everyone is in chains. You're not in chains. But he means metaphysical chains of servitude and obligation, bonds to one another,
It's not even true. From his own perspective, the king's in chains.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But he means the king has relations to other people. The chains are the relationships you have to other people. Yes. Yes, well, that's what he thinks.
The tyranny, I can't help it.
Yes, your mother's calling. You have to take this call. Oh, I'm being so oppressed. This is Rousseau's. I mean, Rousseau did put all of his children up for adoption because he's a piece of ass. So this is the kind of guy you're dealing with. But anyway, so he begins by saying, well, look, the early societies, the only natural bonds with the family, which is an advancement on his thoughts from the Discourse on Inequality, where he thought that men were just running around in the woods on their own. So a slight upgrade in his thoughts there. But the children, of course, have got no relation or dependency on the parents as soon as they come of age. So there's no reason they stay together. It's only habit that keeps them together. They don't love each other or anything. And he talks about people like they're robots as well, by the way, all the way through this. It's just like, it really is the Futurama sketch. Right. Anyway.
Also, they leave home, never return to each other ever again.
Yes. And it's important that we understand that he begins by presupposing that there is, as he did in Discourse, a single kind of savage man that exists in the wilderness on his own. And all savages are the same because they can't develop a culture. So they can't develop sort of cultural habits. And so he presupposes this single kind of universal human that populates everywhere at all times. He explicitly states this. I know it's nonsense, but this is his nonsense. It's not my nonsense.
No one has any personality.
Basically, yeah.
So even if they're all separated, they'd all have the same culture because it's not like anyone thinks anything different ever.
Well, culture is a product of society, right? It's a product of people forming traditions and habits.
But also you can make culture on your own. You can make habits on your own.
Yeah, but they wouldn't really be habits as he's talking about them. What he's talking about are, like the crowning of the queen and the fact that everyone dresses in a particular way.
Perhaps, sure.
That's what he's talking about when he's talking about culture. Your habits of like going down to the local river to try and catch a fish.
Still nonsense, but okay.
Yeah, but that's not what he means. But and so in a way, he would be right if men were just individually wandering around the woods. Yeah, they wouldn't have culture as we would describe culture. But of course, that never happened. But anyway, so on chapter 5, he begins with like, well, what happens when people vote and 10 people vote one way and one person votes another way? When do they get the authority to just impose their will on that one person? And his answer really boils down to that person does want the thing they voted against. They just don't know it. Anyway, chapter 6 is the social pact. And this is where he starts really...
We're going to come back to that, right?
We are going to come back to that, right?
Yep.
We are... We are going to come back to all of this. So chapter 6 is the social pact, which is where he's laying out like the details and the overarching goal of the social contract. So here is the thing he wants to solve, which is exactly as described earlier. How everyone can live in a society and remain completely free and obey only themselves. And what's interesting is that as he's laying out the structure of the social contract, he says this, right? Each clause of the contract must be so defined that, quote, the slightest modification would render them vain and ineffectual, and so it must be so perfectly crafted that any change to the social contract would render the whole thing unable to function. And he describes it repeatedly as descending into the most evil of tyrannies. So if you don't get this exactly right, you're just going to live in a tyrannical despotism.
One jot to the left or the right, and it's over.
That's right. A spelling mistake in the contract would mean
and only I, Rousseau, have the perfect politics to pick this out.
Yes, that's true. He's the saint who is delivering this divine wisdom.
The most arrogant man alive. I mean, at least Muhammad would say, no, I got this from Allah.
Yes. Well, he actually mentions that later on. He's like, well, look, this means that lawmakers, this is why they often appeal to God, because, they've got to be really virtuous men. Tell me more about equality. But anyway... Anyway, so the clauses of this contract are everywhere the same. So it's in all times and all places. Although later on he does say, well, this isn't for like every people. It's like, but you did say they were, But anyway, but they're all the same everywhere until they are violated, upon which each man instantly regains his original rights and recovers his natural liberty and loses all the benefits of the contract. So the very second this beautiful equilibrium, like a spider's web of clauses, is broken, the entire thing comes down. That's it. Civilization's over. You're back in the state of nature. Enjoy. So like some mum who's just washing some clothes just suddenly sees mobs of people running down the street screaming. And she's, oh, the contract must be over. The social contract's dissolved. Someone must have got one of the clauses wrong or something.
Just stabs her baby to
Well,
death.
who knows? She can do whatever she wants. She's perfectly free now. There'll be no punishments for anything. The whole thing's over. It's ridiculous, right? So anyway, so when properly understood, Rousseau tells us, these clauses should basically be reducible to one particular statement, which is the total alienation of the whole community of each associate with all of his rights. So you give up everything into this social contract. Any of your natural rights, anything that you think was yours, you give up into this weird homogenous body of people who all are exactly the same. Plausible, isn't it?
I love how this is his perfect politics.
Yes.
He's thought so hard about this.
Yes.
That's the best he came up with.
No. He really has thought very hard about this. It's all nonsense, but you can see why the French would enjoy it. I mean, why? Like any English person look at this like, we go, no, that's just not going to work. And the French like, but.
Why being French is a sin.
So the reason for this is that each person gives himself up entirely to the community, and the conditions therefore become equal for all, right? Which means
a rapist.
Right? But this would surely mean that no individual person would want to make conditions worse for anyone else because everyone shares exactly the same conditions. Get in the pod, eat the boogs.
I love being in the pod and the boogs. Why do you not?
Exactly. And if you don't, then you're a threat to the entire system. But we'll get to that. Anyway, so this alienation makes the union, quote, as perfect as it can be, and no individual can therefore claim anything as his own. If rights were left to individuals, I love how ridiculous this is, right? If rights were left to individuals, there would be no common superior to judge, each man becoming a judge in his own cause, and the state of nature would subsist and the association would become tyrannical. So if you don't give every right, natural right of yours up to the state, then you're a tyrant. You're facilitating tyranny by not giving yourself over completely to the collective.
You know what's funny? This is the kind of nonsense you find at Speaker's Corner from some leftists.
Oh, I
who's
bet.
come there to tell you about how anarchism is the way forwards or something like that.
Don't doubt.
It's just like, what the hell are you talking about? I also love that because we've gone through this in the revolutions in China, in which you cried really, really hard to get rid of private property, and they did succeed all the way to your stomach. And people still had food in their stomach, and therefore there was still private property.
Yeah.
Because if you'd eaten it, it was yours.
Yeah.
And they're like, damn, we failed.
That's exactly what Rousseau is saying.
Okay,
It's
well, if you
exactly
don't give
what
up the
he's saying.
contents of your stomach as well, then
Get heaving, you know.
the whole thing's
That's
well,
the
everyone's
people's
a tyrant.
contents. Yeah, exactly. You're facilitating tyranny. And so he, of course, has defined the social contract as...
Again, we all have to be dead for this to actually work.
I mean, technically, no. He would say this was for living people, just robots. We all have to be robots.
The living dead.
Yeah, but anyway, from this social contract, a public person is formed. The union of all these members, everyone unanimously agrees to the social contract. Right? You have to unanimously agree to it. This becomes known as the body politic.
Do you have any plans on how to do this in reality, or is this just his fantasy?
Oh
world?
yeah, he'll get to it.
Okay.
He'll get to it. So the body politic has a common self, is referred to as moi, then me, has a life and will of its own. John Locke, obviously, I mean, you can compare Rousseau's views to John Locke's views on this. And John Locke's just like, well, I mean, there is a body politic, but it's just the people in the political society. And the general will is not the will of everyone, whether they know or not. It's the will of the majority.
Or those who have the power.
Yeah.
They
The
might be
voting public, basically.
Yeah, but they may also just be in a minority.
Oh, sure, yeah. But like those people who vote, it's the majority will of the voters. It's not, you didn't know you were wrong. You know, it's very much more sensible compared to Rousseau. Anyway. But I mean, anything is, to be honest.
It's the joke ideology of like, well, 20 million people can't be wrong. So,
Actually, well, yeah, that's
that many
exactly
people
it.
voted for the Nazis, so maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. So Rousseau calls the public person the state when it's passive, when it's just doing nothing, the sovereign when it's active, and a power when compared to other body politics, or the similar bodies. And the associates, the people in it, take the name of a people, And individually, they are called citizens when they are participating in sovereign power, and subjects when they are subjected to the laws of the state. These are all very important terms. Anyway, so let's talk about the sovereign in
Really
chapter
reduced
7.
everyone to literally serfs again.
Yes, subjects. You're not citizens unless you're part of the active embodiment of the general will.
Yeah. If you're part of the party, you're a citizen.
Yes,
If you're going against the party this week,
you're a subject.
to watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.